This photo stunned the entire internet. Just look at what the dog found. Emma had always been a creature of habit. Every evening, after a long shift at the diner, she walked the same quiet street home, enjoying the crisp night air. But one particular evening, something unusual caught her eye. A large German shepherd standing motionless near a storm drain. Its glossy black fur glistened under the streetlights, but its stance was tense, its ears pricked forward. It wasn't just wandering, it was guarding something. Its deep, soulful eyes locked onto Emma's, filled with something she couldn't quite place. Was it desperation? Fear? She cautiously stepped closer, her heart pounding. But what happened next left her speechless. The dog refused to eat, and what he did next sent chills down my spine. Emma hesitated. The German shepherd, whom she later named Shadow, stood his ground, his dark eyes locked onto hers. She wasn't afraid of dogs, but something about his intensity made her cautious. The street was eerily quiet, just the hum of a distant car engine and the rustling of dry leaves in the breeze. Shadow didn't beg, didn't whine, didn't even wag his tail. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the storm drain, his body tense with a quiet urgency. Something was wrong. Emma took a slow step closer, her pulse quickening. Shadow didn't move, but his ears twitched. Carefully, she knelt and peered through the iron grates. Darkness. At first, she saw nothing but damp concrete and shadows stretching into the unknown. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Maybe. Then she heard it, a faint, desperate sound. Soft, barely there, but unmistakable. A whimper? No. A meow. Emma's breath caught in her throat. There was something down there. Something alive. Heart hammering, she turned back to Shadow. His gaze never wavered. He had known all along. He wasn't hungry for food. He was waiting for help. Determined, Emma rushed into the small grocery store nearby, grabbing a pack of beef jerky and a flashlight from the counter. The cashier gave her a curious look, but she had no time to explain. She sprinted back outside, tore open the jerky, and tossed a few pieces toward Shadow. He sniffed them but didn't eat. Instead, to her shock, he picked up the pieces in his mouth and gently dropped them through the drain grates. One by one. Emma felt a chill crawl up her spine. This dog had been feeding something in the drain all along. But what exactly was down there? And how long had Shadow been standing guard? The moment I realized the truth, my heart stopped. Emma's fingers trembled as she gripped the flashlight. Shadow had been feeding something, or someone down there. But what? The eerie quiet of the street made her breath feel too loud, her heart pounding against her ribs. She clicked on the flashlight and slowly lowered it toward the grates. At first, she saw only the slick, damp concrete of the drain's interior, a few scattered leaves, a dark puddle reflecting the glow of her light. But then, movement. A small, fragile shape huddled in the corner, its fur matted and drenched. A kitten, tiny, shivering, its eyes wide with fear. Emma's stomach twisted. How long had it been trapped down there? Had it been waiting in the dark, alone, hungry, until Shadow came along? Her thoughts raced. She had to get it out. But as she shifted to look closer, Shadow let out a low, warning growl. Not at her, but at something else. She froze. A second meow. Then another. More movement. Emma's flashlight caught something she wasn't expecting. Another kitten. Then another. And another. She counted 6 tiny, frail bodies, all pressed against the cold, damp walls of the drain. Their little faces peeked up at her, eyes glassy with exhaustion. Her throat tightened. Shadow hadn't just been feeding one kitten. He had been caring for an entire litter. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. This dog, this street-worn, lonely German shepherd, had been standing guard, refusing to leave these helpless kittens behind. He had sacrificed his own hunger, night after night, to make sure they survived. Emma swallowed hard. She knew what she had to do. She turned and sprinted, dialing 911 with shaky hands. She needed help, fast. Shadow had done his part. Now it was her turn. What the firefighters pulled out of the drain left everyone speechless. Emma paced anxiously on the sidewalk, her phone pressed tightly against her ear. "You have to hurry. There are kittens trapped in the storm drain." She could barely keep her voice steady as she gave the dispatcher the location. Shadow, sensing the urgency, let out a soft whine and nudged Emma's leg. His deep brown eyes locked onto hers as if pleading, "Don't let them suffer." Minutes later, the wail of sirens broke through the night air. A red fire truck screeched to a stop, and a team of firefighters jumped out. Emma wasted no time rushing toward them. "They're in there," she gasped, pointing at the drain. "6 kittens. I don't know how long they've been stuck." One of the firefighters knelt beside the grate, flicking on his heavy-duty flashlight. His face hardened as he peered into the darkness. "We've got movement. We need to get them out now." The team sprang into action. With practiced precision, they unbolted the heavy metal grate and carefully lifted it aside. A firefighter, clad in protective gear, lowered himself into the narrow space. The moment his boots hit the bottom, the kittens let out a chorus of weak, desperate meows. Then came the first rescue. He gently cradled a tiny black and white kitten, no bigger than the palm of his hand. As he passed it up to Emma, her heart clenched. It was cold, too cold. She instinctively pulled it close, warming it against her chest. One by one, the firefighter retrieved the others. A calico, a gray tabby, a ginger, 2 more black kittens, each one frail, clinging to life. The crowd that had gathered gasped, murmuring in disbelief. But Shadow was ecstatic. His tail wagged wildly, his paws tapping the pavement as he sniffed each rescued kitten. And then, something no one expected. "There's something else down here," the firefighter called out. Emma's breath caught. What else had been trapped in the dark? What the firefighter found next changed everything. Emma's heart pounded. The kittens were safe, but the firefighter's words sent a fresh wave of unease through her. Something else was in the drain. The street, once bustling with murmurs and gasps, fell silent as everyone strained to see what lay hidden beneath the city's surface. The firefighter, his beam cut through the damp darkness below. Shadow, who had been wagging his tail moments ago, suddenly stilled. His ears perked, his stance rigid. He knew. Then the firefighter cursed under his breath. "There's another one." Emma's breath hitched. "Another kitten?" No. The way the firefighter hesitated told her this was something different. Carefully, he reached further into the drain, his gloved hands disappearing into the shadows. A tense second passed, then another, and then he lifted something out. A small, frail shape. A kitten, yes, but this one wasn't moving. The gasps from the crowd turned into murmurs of concern. Emma's throat tightened as she rushed forward. The tiny creature dangled limply in the firefighter's grasp, its fur soaked, its body frighteningly still. Emma's hands flew to her mouth. Please, not this one. She didn't think. She just acted. "Give it to me," she said, her voice shaking. The firefighter quickly passed the kitten to her. Its body was ice cold, lifeless. But Emma refused to believe it was too late. It couldn't be too late. Shadow whimpered, nudging her leg as if urging her to do something. Anything. Emma knelt on the pavement, cupping the tiny creature in her hands, rubbing its damp fur, willing warmth back into its body. "Come on, little one," she whispered. "You're safe now. Stay with me." A long, excruciating moment passed. Nothing. Then, a tiny twitch, a gasp from the crowd. The kitten's frail chest rose, barely noticeable at first. Then again, stronger this time. And then, a weak, raspy meow. Tears blurred Emma's vision. It was alive. A wave of cheers erupted around her. Shadow barked excitedly, his tail thumping against the ground. The firefighter let out a breath of relief. But for Emma, this wasn't just about saving a kitten. It was about something bigger. She looked at Shadow, his eyes shining with pride. He had never given up on these kittens, and neither would she. Shadow had saved them all, but who would save him? The kittens were safe. Emma cradled the tiniest one against her chest, feeling its fragile heartbeat steady with each passing second. Around her, the gathered crowd murmured in awe, some wiping away tears. The firefighters wrapped the rescued kittens in warm blankets, readying them for the vet. But just as relief washed over her, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. Shadow was backing away. His tail, which had wagged moments ago in excitement, now hung low. His ears flattened against his head. He cast one long look at the kittens, his kittens, and then, before Emma could say a word, he turned and ran. Panic surged through her. "Shadow, wait!" she called, scrambling to her feet. But the dog had already disappeared into the night, his dark coat blending with the shadows. Emma felt an ache deep in her chest. Why was he leaving? A firefighter approached, adjusting his cap. "Strays do that," he said with a sigh. "They don't expect kindness. They help, they give, but they don't think they deserve anything in return." Emma clenched her jaw. Number that wasn't right. Shadow wasn't just a stray. He was a hero. He had done what no one else had. He had protected these kittens, stood by them, fed them when no one else did. And now, he was alone again? She wouldn't allow it. Determined, Emma grabbed a blanket and bolted down the street. The cool night air stung her cheeks, but she didn't slow down. Her eyes darted to every alley, every storefront. Then a flicker of movement. A shadow curled near a dumpster. Shadow. He lay there, head resting on his paws, watching her approach with wary eyes. Emma slowed, breathless. She knelt beside him, holding out a hand. "You saved them," she whispered. "Now let me save you." For the first time, Shadow didn't move away. His tail gave the faintest wag, and Emma knew he was finally coming home. Shadow had spent his life saving others. Now it was his turn to be loved. For a moment, Emma held her breath, waiting. The night air was still, thick with anticipation. Shadow had always run, always disappeared into the darkness, as if convinced he didn't belong anywhere. But now, as he gazed up at her with those deep, knowing eyes, something was different. Slowly, cautiously, she extended the blanket. Shadow flinched at first, instinct telling him to retreat, to stay a ghost in the world. But then he didn't. Instead, he leaned into her touch. It was slight, barely more than a brush of his fur against her fingers, but it was enough. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. "Come home with me," she whispered, and this time, he did. The walk back was slow, deliberate. Emma didn't tug, didn't force. Shadow followed her, step by step, as if testing whether this was real, whether he could truly trust her. By the time they reached her front door, he hesitated, staring at the threshold like a barrier he had never dared cross before. Emma knelt beside him. "It's okay," she murmured. "You don't have to fight anymore." A beat, a breath, then Shadow stepped inside. The days that followed were a revelation. For the first time in who knows how long, Shadow slept in a warm bed, ate a full meal without worrying about saving scraps for others. He stretched out in the sunlight, tail thumping against the floor, learning what it meant to be safe. But the greatest moment of all came when the vet called. The kittens, his kittens, had all recovered and found loving homes. One by one, families had come forward, touched by the story of the dog who had refused to abandon them. As Emma watched Shadow nap by the fireplace, his paws twitching in some dream, she reached over and ran her fingers through his thick fur. "You did good," she whispered, and for the first time, Shadow was home. The power of kindness and second chances life often places us in unexpected situations where we must choose between walking away or extending a helping hand. Shadow, the stray dog, didn't hesitate. He gave everything he had to protect those who couldn't fend for themselves. In return, he found a home, proving that kindness has a way of coming full circle. Many of us, especially as we grow older, feel like we've given so much without expecting anything in return. But just like Shadow, we are never too old to be loved, to belong, and to find a place where we are truly valued. Compassion, in the end, always finds its way back.